Trying to figure out, I got 44 I think I did better with the second time than the first. And that's the next statement. They would say, based on this conclusion, this is true, is this correct, incorrect, or not enough information to make a decision. And they would have questions like, which of these series of numbers, what's the next number in this series? And then you have to answer that. Yeah, and then it would say, which, because I have a bunch of numbers saying, what is the smallest number? 1/3, 1/5, 1/6, 1/8. What's the smallest number? I'm like, and you hit I'm like, that's impossible. She said, well, it's not designed for everybody. It's designed for everybody. Oh my goodness. I'm so stressed. And then, of course, I signed all the stuff. I think I signed all of it. I mean, one thing after another, people listen. We've got something we're working on that nobody knows what's in the NBA thing. I mean, all these things.
I went to HR I went and got my 22s the other day, and it's like $2,400. He didn't have the van ready for the 23 ones, so I went back today and signed my 23 papers. $9,000 for 20 grand back.
So it was.
Yeah, the van was like 7,200. In my name.
So you can just chop that down. I love the change. They're giving us a right. I'm taking money now. He was telling me, showing me. I was shocked. They're like, I was worried. I'm worried.
I don't think I will be.
I said, well, I don't have a big car. Well, they actually said,
So Tom just reminded me that it's Bros and Barbecue and Ladies Lunch and Learn Sunday. Who do we have? Who's doing the lesson for? Okay. I think Tom? Yeah. Tom? Oh, okay, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. We just got through the hidden in my heart, or not hidden in my heart, the what's the name of the book? Your AM sermon, Meeting God's People on Isaiah.
oh, that's true.
Yeah. All right, so this evening, I want you to keep in your minds, put yourself in the shoes of a skeptic, someone who, at the very least, has doubts about whether the Bible is from God. Maybe they don't believe that there is a God. Put yourself in the shoes of a skeptic this evening, and think about the things we're about to discuss. Does the skeptic believe in King David? Do you think? So a very shallow one who has put very little into investigating would probably say, "Oh, David's a made-up person." But there's archaeological evidence for that, isn't there? There's a no serious critic is going to deny that King David existed, right? The stem of Jesse, as Isaiah refers to our Lord, um, the skeptic, what's he got to say about that? I don't think we have real hard evidence just from archaeology that Jesse was the son of this King David we find that is absolutely lived if we look at the evidence from secular history. But we have a lot of events that we're about to discuss that can be corroborated by secular history. And we're going to, at some level, answer the skeptic this evening. We're going to be starting a new section on Isaiah that starts in chapter 13, goes through 23, prophecies concerning the nations, prophecies concerning these different nations. And we read something the skeptic is going to deny is going to be predictive prophecy. They don't believe that Isaiah predicted the future from his time. He didn't have these prophecies that he would deliver and they would come to pass over 100 years later. They don't believe that. Isaiah 14:24, that's our new focus. It's going to be our focus throughout these lessons. The Lord of hosts hath sworn, saying, surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass. And as I have purposed, so shall it stand. So that's our memory work going forward. But for this section, Isaiah 14:24. What we do know concerning secular history. I got things out of order. I'm sorry. Let's back up. So these are going to be these sections. And I've condensed these down because I don't want you guys to get burnt out on Isaiah, right? Are you guys getting burnt out on Isaiah yet? No? All right. That's good to hear. Ask you after Sunday. So he knows he's got bros and barbecue. So I'm going to condense them down because a lot of these nations have a lot of things in common. Pride is a very big common denominator among these nations that judgment is being pronounced on. So I've isolated maybe a few issues with each of these nations, and we're going to talk about that. And my goal, I'm not going to do it this evening. There's a lot with Babylon we're going to talk about. And a lot of what we're talking about with Babylon is going to set us up, lay a foundation for the other nations, because we're going to be looking at predictive prophecy here this evening. But I've isolated maybe one unique thing about each nation, and we're going to be talking about each of those. With Babylon, in addition to this predictive prophecy, we're talking about the fall of human pride. Assyria, God's sovereignty over empires. With Philistia, gloating over the judgment of others. Moab, the compassion that God has in judgment. Israel and Damascus, fading glory, the fact that you can fall from grace. Cush and Egypt, the reach of God's rule. I'm about to show you a map, and you're going to see just how far Cush is from the region of Judah and Israel. So the reach of God's rule. The Arabia, Edom, and Duma, that's a false security, especially Edom. Jerusalem, when God's people grow complacent. Tyre and Sidon, the collapse of materialism. Those Phoenicians had a very wealthy, luxurious lifestyle because they were a part of an important trade location, because they were right there, a port, if you will. Edom and Bozrah, the day of the Lord. judgment was coming. And that judgment, what do we know happened? So we know, and we're in this period with Isaiah, that the Assyrians had control basically over the world at one point. They were the world empire from at least 911 to 609 BC. That's probably a little bit later. There's an overlap with who comes next? Which empire comes next? Babylon. The Babylonians took over around 606 BC. We see them rising to power, and their empire would last maybe until 536 BC. We know that happened. This is all in secular history. And then we know that, of course, I tried to fix the text, and it went right back to it. The Persian Empire is what that says, coming up after Babylon. And all of this is corroborated by the biblical text. This is something we know happened. We know from secular history that these empires came and they went in just that order. And the Bible corroborates this. The Bible is not a secular history book, but it confirms or corroborates secular history. So we have, this is a huge map. What do we know happened? Do the events described in Isaiah match secular history books? As a secular, putting on your secular, your skeptic glasses this evening, see where we don't answer that this evening, right? Were they described by Isaiah before the events occurred? So the skeptic might say, well, it was written after the fact. See if we don't answer that this evening. How can we trust the claims of the author during the time in which the book was written? It's related to that other point. How can we trust during what three kings did Isaiah write? Whose death? Who died one year, and that's the beginning of Isaiah's prophecy. Uzziah. So you have Uzziah, Jotham. I should have said four. Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah. And so the author says it's in the days of these kings that my prophecies are happening. It's in the Isaiah chapter 6, that vision he had was in the year of Uzziah's death. And so how can we trust the claims of the author that that's when he wrote the book? Skeptic, we'll see if we answer that this evening. What are the implications of Isaiah describing specific nations and events perfectly, multiple generations before they would occur? Right, absolutely. That's the answer we arrive at, the conclusion we arrive to. Man could not have written this book. And so we're going to be looking at it. Isaiah is fascinating. Not to say that the other prophets aren't, but it is fascinating as far as what he predicted. Later on, we're going to see he predicts the name of a king hundreds of years before he was born. How does a book written by man do that? It can't do it. It can't be done. So we're going to look at these this evening. So chapters 13 through 23, prophecies concerning the nations. And first up, we have Babylon. Of course, this is the second empire in the list we just gave of what we know happened. It was Assyria first, then Babylon, right? And so Babylon, the fall of human pride. And we're going to see in this lesson the downfall of human arrogance, the downfall of self-exaltation. And who's heard of Percy Shelley, poet? Percy Shelley from the late 1800s? English. This poem, I remember this from high school, and it's been in my, I think of this every time this subject comes up. It's called Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions red, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my work, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So this poem, which Percy Shelley writes, is as though he's hearing this tale from a traveler who comes from a desert, distant land, and he's come across this plaque. It reads, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, in despair." And where's the statue that those feet belong to? That plaque belongs to? It's gone. And that's a picture of our arrogance, of mankind's arrogance. He thinks he's great, thinks he's powerful, but he's nothing when it comes down to it. He's nothing without God as his strength. And it's probably not the level that Percy Shelley was taking that to, but you get the point from the poem. Anybody else familiar with that poem? Good one. So now, Isaiah is prophesying these things. First of all, who is Babylon? Location here. City is going to be coming up in just a few slides. So the Babylonian Empire, though. Modern day Iraq, known as a cultural and military superpower. It's also known in Scripture for its adultery, its luxury, and its military might. And in Isaiah chapter 13 and 14, Babylon is as he's describing it, it's at a peak of some sort, but as he's writing it, Babylon is not at its peak. Isaiah prophesies before the rise of Babylon. If you remember the map I had before, there was a point where there was a power vacuum. You guys remember that map? There's a power vacuum where Assyria was defeated, and you had Egypt coming up from the south, and you'd eventually have that meeting between Egypt and Babylon, the Battle of Carchemish, and guess who wins? Babylon wins. Babylon becomes the world power. But all of that is unknown to Isaiah. Isaiah here prophesies the fall of Assyria, and we'll see that in chapter 14, verse 25. He prophesies and accurately tells of the rise of Babylon in the passages we're about to look at. You see, can look at chapter 14 and verse 16. Their children also shall be dashed to pieces before their eyes. That's the wrong verse. That one. That's discussing the fall of Babylon. You have the rise of the Medes in. I was in the wrong chapter. That's what that was. 14 and verse 16 and following. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake the kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness, and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of his prisoners? All the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, every one his own house. So before Babylon could fall, Babylon had to rise, right? Before Babylon could fall, it had to be known as Isaiah describes here in verse 16. Is this the man that made the earth tremble? They had to come to a point where they made the earth tremble and shake the kingdoms. They certainly shook Assyria. They certainly shook Egypt and all the nations around them. Certainly took many captive from the nations around them. That wasn't the case in Isaiah's day. That hadn't been happening in Isaiah's day. So you have the rise of the Babylonians accurately predicted just by implication in verse 16 in this whole passage, really. The rise of the Medes, we see, backing up into chapter 13, verses 17 and 18. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes shall not spare children. So he's not only talking about the rise of the Babylonians, the fall of Assyria, the rise of the Babylonians, but he's also predicting the rise of the Medes. Yes, sir.
Version are you again? I'm just curious.
King James.
King James.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then you have the fall of Babylon being predicted accurately. In verse 19, in Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees, excellency shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse chapter 14 and verse 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? And then in verse chapter 21, Isaiah also speaks of the fall of Babylon. In verse 9, and behold, here cometh a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all the graven images of her gods he hath broken unto the ground. So Isaiah is predicting a lot of, he's making specific predictions. First of all, these are specific nations. None of them you could see coming as being the world power in Isaiah's day. But we've established some historical facts. First of all, Isaiah's prophecy, which takes place between 740 and 700 BC, at this point, Assyria is the world dominant power, and not Babylon. Babylon's prominence came later, especially when Nebuchadnezzar came on the scene around 605 BC. And Isaiah, as we're seeing here, chapters 13 and 14 predict their rise and their fall long before the empire takes center stage there. So the significance, as Sean was saying, this points to the divine source for Isaiah's message. Also, it's a demonstration that God is in control. Let's back up here. We have from 700, which is, the end of that window where Isaiah is writing, but where he's prophesying. Between 700 and 609 BC, that's 100 years. What happens there? The fall of Assyria. So the world dominant power in the time of Isaiah says it's going to fall. That happens over 100 years later. Then you have the rise of Babylon in 606 BC. And then you have the rise of the Medes and the Persians happening between that time, between 606 and 536, which led to the fall of Babylon itself in 536 BC. That's quite a prediction, isn't it? Quite a list of predictions that Isaiah gave, right? Yep, the people, exactly. But who's around to say, oh wait, Isaiah was right. That document still survived, didn't it? So his word would be confirmed. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. But who's around to say, oh wait, Isaiah was right. That document still survived, didn't it? So his word would be confirmed. Yep, exactly. Yeah. So It's a validation of divine foreknowledge there. It's also a demonstration that God is in control because he doesn't merely react. Let's go back here. Doesn't merely react to world events here. He's orchestrating a timeline for his purposes. And as our memory work there, chapter 14:24, surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass. And as I have purposed, so shall it stand. So he's orchestrating this. This stuff is happening for his purposes. He knows it's going to happen. He's standing outside of time. We look at this timeline, we can only see things linearly, right? We can only know what's happened before. We can't know what's coming in front of us because we're at, a certain point on the timeline. He's standing outside it. He knows what's going to happen. So Isaiah is right here in this timeline. There's no way he's going to know what all is going to occur without the help of God, without God inspiring his message here. And also, it's a validation of divine foreknowledge. It's a demonstration that God's in control, and it's also a distinguishing of the Bible from human experts. Because, if you compare the Bible, Isaiah, other passages with ancient oracles or, modern political pundits, you think 100% people, 100% of the pundits before January 5th got the outcome of the election right? No. And even those that were right didn't know for sure, did they? Predictions are often general. They're either general, they're safe, or they're wrong, right? Isaiah's are none of those. They're not general. He's specifically pointing and naming these nations, and later that he'll name Cyrus himself. So Isaiah here, he notes, he names Babylon, he names Assyria, Moab, all of these nations, he's naming them specific, and he's naming specific outcomes to these nations, fall, ruin, weeping. And many skeptical scholars, remember, put your skeptic glasses on here, would date Isaiah later because they find the accuracy of these things hard to accept, right? That's a testament to the predictions themselves, the prophecy themselves, because it's an ironic affirmation how specific Isaiah is. But historical markers within Isaiah include the reigns of the kings, and we can look at chapter 1 and verse 1, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, the kings of Judah. All four of them have a specific year on the timeline or window of years in which their reign occurred. And so we can know when Isaiah was writing his prophecy. So that would place it between 740 and 700 BC. The reigns of those four kings themselves reigned between 790 and 686 BC. And then you have a description of current events that, if you think about it, if you were writing fiction about the past, how far would you go in including current events? Isaiah gets very detailed. He includes the Assyrian threat under Tiglath-Pileser. We read of that in chapter 7. We'll also read of it again in chapters 36 and 37. You have that alliance between Syria and Israel, as we saw that in chapter 7 as well. All these are current events that Isaiah includes that one, if they were writing fiction, would not have thought to include. And Isaiah's dialogue also with Ahaz and Hezekiah dates his writing as well. And so skeptics, they've either got to argue that these were added later, with a fictional accuracy, or accept that Isaiah had knowledge of the events that were going around him in the time that he lived. And I think that last explanation is better. So there are references of Isaiah's interaction with Hezekiah, as well as the Assyrian crisis in other books as well. If you turn to 2 Kings 19 and 20, also 2 Chronicles 26 through 32, you see the very event that Isaiah is talking about corroborated in those books as well. And some have noticed that those accounts also match the voice of Isaiah. That's interesting. It's likely he had a part in writing those books as well. So these books were compiled not very long after Isaiah's time, and that would suggest that Isaiah's activity was already known, it was already preserved by the time those books came out. Also, the Dead Sea Scrolls. You've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've mentioned it a few times. The Dead Sea Scrolls provide a lot of evidence. In fact, the Great Isaiah Scroll, as they call it, was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, those caves of Qumran. And that Isaiah scroll is dated to 125 BC. It's the oldest known copy of the book of Isaiah. 125 BC. Contains all 66 chapters of Isaiah. It has no structural division in the manuscript to say that Isaiah stopped writing here and somebody else started writing here. No evidence of that occurs in the manuscript, and the skeptic would say that that occurred between chapters 39 and 40. And so the skeptic says, or some skeptics have said that Isaiah was compiled over centuries, and finding this scroll in Qumran dated it to 125, just completely does away with that.
There's something very recently I learned about the view the Dead Sea Scrolls for proving. I mean, I think it was recently, maybe within 2 years. Am I right on that? I just wasn't crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. I know it's been in the news some. The Dead Sea Scrolls has. Yeah, they've been slowly. Technology has improved to where they can read more of it. So I know it's been in the news for that reason. But the entire book of Isaiah, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, dated it to 125 BC. So even liberal scholars have to admit that Isaiah 13 through 14 was part of a unified book by at least 125 BC. So therefore, we have a book that claims to be written in the 700s BC. It accurately describes the political events of that time. It is cited as historical by near contemporary records, such as the Kings and the Chronicles. It exists in full, not parts, in full, in manuscripts over 100 years before Christ. It predicts the fall of Babylon before Babylon was even a major threat to anyone. And therefore the burden of the proof shifts to the skeptics, doesn't it? They have to explain how the book could fake accuracy, first of all, and they would have to explain why the writer would bother using old kings lists from 8th century BC political concerns. So they'd also have to explain how it existed in full centuries before the supposed post-exile redaction, as they call it. This also addresses the Deutero-Isaiah theory, and that claims that Isaiah chapters 40 through 66 was written by a later author during the period of the exile. However, as we mentioned, no ancient manuscripts split the book. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserved it as one scroll, not many. And then Jesus and the New Testament authors quote Isaiah indiscriminately, uh, using both halves. They attribute it to the same person, Isaiah. Just for example, John chapter 12, 38 through 41, cites both Isaiah 6 and Isaiah 53. And he attributes it to Isaiah, one author. So to discount Isaiah as predictive prophecy, to say it's not predictive prophecy, to say it's not messianic prophecy, you disagree with Jesus himself and the New Testament writers. So the only reason, though, someone would try to redate the passage is because the prophecy is too accurate, right? That's the only reason they would go to such lengths to explain away the prophecies in Isaiah, because you have to come to the conclusion that Isaiah predicted these things, and you can't come to the conclusion that a mere man could predict these things. You'd have to come to the conclusion that Isaiah is a message from God. It is God's message. So the result of that is not only our increased confidence that Isaiah is the word of God, it increases confidence in other prophecies that Isaiah gives us. He gives us the virgin birth, as we saw in Isaiah 7:14. Gives us the suffering servant, as he's commonly called in Isaiah 53. And then he has the reign of Messiah, as we just looked at in chapter 9, in verses 6 through 7. And just to give you an idea of how remarkable it is that Isaiah was able to do this, to predict in 1990 that Ukraine, which back in 1990 was just a quiet part of what nation? The USSR, right? The Soviets, right? So, which was crumbling at that point, right? So Ukraine is a part of this crumbling nation. And so if you were to say in 1990 that Ukraine would become independent, would be invaded by Russia, would galvanize some sort of sympathy from the earth, the rest of the world, and then it would actually, this Ukraine would play a part in the global power dynamics. That'd be unthinkable, right? And that's a little over 30 years ago, right? This is hundreds of years, or over 100 years, that Isaiah is predicting at least this first mark, the fall of Assyria. It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? So I don't think we have a whole lot of time to go into the lessons we learned from it, but I think, does anybody see any holes in their trust in Isaiah as being from God?
I guess my question would be, what would be needed to say that it comes from God? Because if it's not Isaiah, it's nothing.
Right.
I mean, everything you've gone through is phenomenal. And to your point about Ukraine and Russia, I mean, it's one thing to have a little power and then, a century, 2 centuries, 3 centuries go by. Look at the power dynamics and how small amount of time and there's transition. And he's predicting that. And then again, the audience who he's writing to, it's obvious that this is divine. It's not being written to a specific small scope.
Right.
To your point, so general or it's trying to itself be predictive.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what's happening here. This is God providing clarity to his Old Testament people so that they could cope through that process, and ultimately that we as the audience can see his power and see that he's sovereign.
Absolutely. We can look at the evidence for ourselves today, and it is powerful just to see everything line up the way it does. And And if we wanted to make a prediction of the future, we wouldn't be specific. We would be very general about it. Yes, sir. All right.
Well, let's just pretend it's 2025. If you go back in history, you see the futility of everything that man does.
Mhm.
Even if Isaiah was written last year, I mean, it's dead on.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
Yeah, man, get stuff wrong all the time. And your point about current, like, I'm curious, like, prior to the printing press, how long did it take to get back into those facts to diffuse? But here Isaiah is writing with a system that information did not spread.
That's a very good point.
Accurate information, I'm sure, was hardly ever covered even today. It's not.
Yeah.
And yet he's spot on.
Mhm.
Well, I would think that some of the skeptics are the Old Testament people, such as the Hebrews, Jews, who would like to diminish a lot of the findings and say,
Right.
it's not necessarily true. Some of it maybe is. So, because they're trying to, of course, Jesus, but they can't explain
Right.
that. You know, they don't want that to explain that. So they're probably part of the problem they're getting with it. And most skeptics, I mean, if you don't believe in God, you would no way believe that that was written by God. And the only way to have that, the history books today aren't written in the past, they're written now, looking back.
Mhm.
And so most history books are things that people have written down and now we pass this information on. But you don't know what would happen tomorrow.
Right.
And so there's no way. It has to be from God or it's not true at all.
Right.
You know.
Absolutely. I suppose one motive for attacking Isaiah is just the sheer fact that every New Testament writer just about quotes it and looks at it as it says, this is talking about Christ, right? This is talking about Christ. And so if you take out Isaiah, you've taken out the New Testament. It doesn't exist, or it's not trustworthy.
you ask somebody, why are you trying to disprove the Bible? Do you hate God? Let's take away God and what do you have left? You have me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's not a good idea. That's not a very good idea.
Right. Where God is not, anything is permitted, right? So that's a lot of people's motives. They want the permission, but they don't really want the permission if they think about it. So I think we've handled that, and that's going to be a good foundation for all these other nations we're going to talk about, because Isaiah is making a lot of prophecies of a lot of these nations. Some of them you might find them insignificant, but there's a lot of lessons coming up. Appreciate everybody's attention. Thank you.
I have